She fell between one step and the next, and I was already moving before my mind had named the thing my eyes had seen. I have stood the east terrace of the Harrogate Palace for 11 years, and in 11 years I have learned that the body knows a wrongness a heartbeat before the head does. That morning the wrongness came dressed as ordinary light. Princess Elara walked the low gravel path that runs beneath the espaliered pear trees, the same path she had walked most mornings since the spring, a book folded shut against her hip, her sister Lady Surrey's a few paces behind with a shawl over one arm. The garden was doing what gardens do in the last hour before the sun climbs, throwing long soft shadows, letting the dew burn off the box hedges, smelling of turned earth and cut grass, and the faint sweetness of the pears going gold above her head. Nothing in it should have frightened a man, and yet the muscles across my shoulders had gone tight the way they go tight before a storm you cannot yet see, and I did not know why. Then the princess stopped walking. She did not stumble the way a person stumbles on a loose stone. There was no catch, no small recovering step, none of the little animal corrections a living body makes without being told. She simply stopped, and her head tilted not toward Surrey's, not toward the sound of a bird, but toward nothing, as if she were listening for a voice that had spoken very far away. The book slid from under her arm and struck the gravel with a flat, dead sound. And I understood, in the cold, clean way you understand a thing you have trained 10,000 hours to understand, that she was going down, and that there was no one between her and the stone but me. I do not remember crossing the terrace. Guardsmen are not supposed to remember such crossings. We make them 100 times in the dark of our own discipline, so that, when the true one comes, the body simply spends what it has saved. I remember the rail under my glove, and then not the rail. I remember Surrey's mouth opening on the front edge of a scream. And I remember catching her, catching Princess Elara of the royal house of Harrogate as her knees folded, and her weight came off the earth entirely, catching her the way you catch something you have decided, in the space of no time at all, that you will not let break. She weighed almost nothing. That was the first true thing, the thing that would not leave me for weeks. A grown woman, a princess of the realm, and she came into my arms lighter than a rifle and a full pack, lighter than she had any business being, her head lolling against my forearm, and her hand, I felt it, I will always feel it, closing once around a fistful of my red tunic before it went slack. Her lips had gone the gray blue of a winter dawn. Her skin, where my glove brushed her cheek settling her, was damp and cold, cold in a warm garden under a climbing sun. And that was the second true thing, and it was the one that made the hair rise on my arms. Elara, Surrey's, was on her knees in the gravel beside us, her hands fluttering over her sister's face without daring to land. Elara, look at me, look, what's wrong, what's happening, why is she? She's fainted, my lady. I said it flat and low, the voice you use when a frightened person needs a wall to lean on more than they need the truth. But it was not the whole of what I thought. I had knelt and turned the princess so her weight lay along my thigh and her head fell back to open her throat, one glove flat under her jaw, and under my fingers I found her pulse, and it was wrong. Not the slow, heavy stroke of a woman who has simply gone faint from tight stays and a warm morning. It was fast and thin and irregular, tripping and stuttering like a drummer who has forgotten the count. And cold sweat stood on her brow, though she had done nothing but walk 200 yards on level ground. I had seen a man look like this once, years before my time in the tunic, in a country I do not name to anyone. He had drunk from a flask that was not what he thought it was. He had gone gray and cold, and his heart had run away with him, and by the time we understood, it was very nearly too late. I did not say that to Lady Surrey's. I said, "Run to the terrace door and tell the first footman you see to send for the royal physician, and to send for him running, not walking, running. Say the princess is down and cold and her pulse is wrong. Then come back. Go now, my lady." She went. Fear is fast when you point it at a door. And I stayed on my knees in the gravel with a princess dying, or something near enough to it to make no difference to a man's hands, and I did the only things I knew. I loosened the collar at her throat. I turned her a little onto her side in case her stomach turned, and it did weakly, and I held her so she would not choke on it, and I was glad of the ugliness of it because a body that fights is a body that is still in the fight. I kept 2 fingers on her pulse and I counted, because counting is what you do when there is nothing else you are permitted to do, and I talked to her low, the way you talk to a spooked horse. Stay. Now stay with me. You're all right. You're not falling anywhere. I have you stay words that meant nothing and were the only thing in the whole bright morning that was entirely true. I want to tell you this part plainly because everything that came after turned on it. When I loosened her collar, the loose cuff of her own sleeve fell back, and I saw her forearm, and on the inside of it, in the soft place below the elbow, there was a small round bruise the yellow-green of a thing 3 or 4 days healing, with a darker point at its center. The kind of mark a needle leaves. And I thought because a guardsman's whole life is spent noticing the thing that does not fit, she has been given something. And then, before I could do anything with the thought, I noticed the second thing that did not fit, and it was worse than the first, because the second thing was a smell. There was a scent on her, faint, sweetish under the vomit and the cold sweat and the crushed grass, a smell like almonds gone slightly to rot, like marzipan left too long in a warm room. It was on her breath, and it was, I would swear it, on the loose fall of hair at her temple, as though it had come up through her from the inside. I had smelled it once before, in that country I do not name, on a cup. It is the smell of a certain thing that is put in food or drink by people who wish a death to look like a weakness of the heart. I did not know, kneeling there, whether I was right. I am a guardsman, not a physician and not an apothecary, and a frightened man's nose lies to him as readily as his eyes. But I knew this, that if I were right, then the truth of what was happening to Princess Elara was not a truth anyone in that palace was going to want spoken aloud, and that the safest thing I could do for her, not for me, was to see and say nothing until I understood who the seeing might reach. So when the physician came at last, breathless, his coat half-buttoned and a case swinging from his hand, and knelt across from me and set his fingers where mine had been, I gave him the facts and I kept the fears. She stopped on the path and went down without a stumble, pulse fast and thin and skipping, skin cold and wet. She's been sick once weakly. She spoke no words. All true, all useful. And I watched his face while he worked, because a man's face when he does not know he is being read will tell you more than his mouth ever will. His name was Master Fenwick, and he was old and careful, and the palace trusted him, and I had trusted him too until that morning. He listened to her heart with a wooden tube pressed to her chest, and he peeled back an eyelid, and he pressed a nail bed and watched the color come back slow, and all the while his face did the ordinary frightened clever work of a physician trying to save a woman he serves. But when he sat back on his heels and let out a breath and said, half to himself and half to me, the heart. It is her heart. She has had these turns before, the poor lady, though never so hard. I saw something cross his eyes that had nothing to do with fear for his patient. I saw relief, not the relief of a doctor whose patient will live. The relief of a man arriving at a conclusion he had already been given and finding it fit. These turns before. I had guarded the east terrace and the garden path for 2 seasons of the princess's morning walks, and I had never once seen her stop, never seen her sway, never seen her lay a hand to her breast or sit sudden on a bench. And yet the physician spoke of turns as though they were a known and settled thing, a story the household had already agreed upon. A story about a fragile heart. A story that would explain a cold sweat and a stopped breath and a bruise on a forearm, and if it came to the worst, a grave. I said nothing. I helped him get her onto the litter the footman brought. I walked at the head of it with her cold hand held in my gloved one. Improper, past all protocol. A guardsman does not hold a princess's hand, and not one soul in that garden said a word to stop me. And I carried the smell of bitter almonds in my chest like a swallowed coal all the way up the terrace stairs and into the shadowed cool of the palace, past the tall painted eyes of dead Harrogate queens. And I thought. Someone in this house means her to die of her heart, and I am the only one who has smelled the lie. That is where this begins, not in a garden. In a garden it only fell. Let me tell you the shape of the house it fell into, because you cannot understand what a man risked without understanding what he risked it against. The king was Alaric, a good man made slow by grief. His first wife, Queen Isolde, had died 4 years before, a long illness born with a grace the realm still spoke of, and he had loved her the way a steady man loves, without noise, so that when she went he did not weep in public but simply became a little further from everyone, a king seen through a pane of gray glass. His son by Isolde was the crown Prince Rowan, 22, grave with his mother's straight look, who loved his sister Elara with the plain fierce loyalty of a brother who has already buried a mother, and does not intend to bury anyone else. Elara was the middle child of that first marriage, 26, unmarried by her own choosing, given to books and the garden, and a quiet the court found unfashionable, and I found restful to guard. And there were the little ones Malin, 9 and missing nothing, Torin, 11 and grave, Bram only 6, who called every guardsman sir. The children of the kings lined the whole apparatus of tunic and rifle and stone existed to keep breathing. And there was the second wife. Queen Consort Morwenna had come 2 years after Isolde's death, and the realm had been glad of it, for a widowed king is a sad thing, and she was clever and handsome and knew how to fill a silent hall with the right kind of sound. She had brought a grown son, Lord Cassius, and a grown daughter, Lady Verena, and a way of arranging a room so that she was always at its warm center. The court adored her. The king was grateful to her, which is a colder thing than love, and which she knew to be a colder thing, and which was, if you understood her at all, the unhealed wound at the root of everything she did. For Morwenna had married the throne and won the country and never once won the man, because the man's heart lay in a grave beside a woman she could not compete with, a dead rival, the worst kind, who never ages and never errs, and whose portraits look down from every wall with the calm certainty of the beloved. And a woman like Morwenna does not forgive a rival she cannot beat. She waits and rearranges and outlives. I did not know that morning in the garden that Morwenna was the shape at the bottom of it. I want to be honest about that. I have told this story since, in the years after, and it is tempting to pretend I saw the whole board from the first square. I did not. I smelled almonds, and I saw a needle mark, and I heard a physician say turns before in a voice that had been coached, and I knew only that the truth was being dressed as a fragile heart before the fragile heart had even stopped beating. Who was doing the dressing, and why, and how far it reached, that I would have to learn the hard way, one dangerous inch at a time, in a house where the most powerful woman in the realm smiled at me by name, and where I was, when all was reckoned, a single guardsman with a rifle he was not permitted to load, and a suspicion he was not permitted to speak. They took her to her own chambers and not to the physician's rooms, on whose order I did not then know, and they laid her in her own bed, and Master Fenwick sat with her through the morning while her heart slowly found its count again and her color came back gray, then gray-pink, then something near to living. She did not wake fully until past noon. I know because I was not sent away. A guardsman had been posted at the princess's door. That was ordinary, that was protocol. A lady of the blood taken ill has a man at her door, and I asked the sergeant of the watch quietly to make it me, and he was a decent man who had seen me carry her up the stairs, and he made it me. So I stood the princess's door that afternoon, in the dim of the drawn curtains, and I heard her come back to the world. The first word she said, when she said one, was not what happened, and not where am I, and not the name of her sister, or her brother, or her father. The first word Princess Elara said, in a cracked whisper I had to lean my whole disciplined body toward to catch, was, "Don't." And then, after a breath, "Don't let them, the cup, don't let them give me the cup." I did not move from the door. A guardsman does not enter a lady's chamber on the strength of a fevered word. But I heard Master Fenwick's chair scrape and his low murmur, Rest now, my lady, you're safe. It was your heart, only your heart. And I heard her make a sound that was not agreement. A thin, frightened sound. A sound that said as plain as any sentence that she did not believe him and could not say so. And then I heard her breathing lengthen and slow as whatever he had given her to calm her took the room. And I stood there in the dark of the corridor with my rifle at my shoulder, and I turned three things over and over in my hands like stones I could not put down. A needle mark, a smell of almonds, and a sick woman's first waking word being asterisk, don't let them give me the cup. A cup given to her. By them. I stood that door until the change of the watch at 6, and in those hours no one came to the princess's chamber whom I did not name to myself and weigh. Ceres came and sat with her sister an hour and came out with red eyes. The crown Prince Rowan came at a stride, still in his riding coat, and I stood aside for him and he stopped in front of me. He knew my face. I had guarded his boyhood, and he said, low and hard, "You caught her." Not a question. "They tell me you caught her before she struck the stone." I said I had. He looked at me a long moment, and there was something working behind his straight gray Isolde eyes, something that was not only a brother's fear, and he said, "Stay near her." And that was all, and it was an order, and I have never in my life been so glad to be given one. Because it meant I was not alone in whatever I had begun to see. It meant the prince, too, was afraid, and princes who love their sisters do not fear a fragile heart. They fear a hand. The last to come in the failing light was the queen consort. Morwenna came without hurry. That was the first thing I marked, and I marked it against her, though I am ashamed now of how eagerly I marked everything against her that evening. A frightened man makes a villain of the nearest powerful person and calls it deduction. But it is a true thing all the same. The household was in a hush of terror. A princess had fallen cold in the garden and might yet die, and the queen consort came down the long gallery at the pace of a woman arriving at a dinner she is not especially looking forward to. She wore gray, tasteful and quiet, the gray of a woman who wishes to be seen grieving before the grief is due. Her ladies flowed behind her. And when she reached the princess's door and I came to attention and barred it as protocol demands, until the physician gives leave, even to a queen she looked at me. I will tell you what her look was, and you may make of it what you like, for I have never been able to make one settled thing of it myself. It was warm. That was the horror of it. She looked at me with a warmth that reached her eyes, a real and practiced and bottomless warmth, and she said, "You are the one who caught her. The whole house is speaking of it. What is your name, guardsman?" I gave it. "I shall remember it," said Queen Consort Morwenna, and smiled at me, and I believed her, and the belief went down my spine like cold water. Because I understood, standing there being smiled at, that a man whose name she chose to remember was a man she had begun to weigh, and I did not yet know for what. Master Fenwick opened the door from within and murmured that the princess slept and must not be woken, and the queen consort inclined her head as though this were only sensible, and did not press to enter, and said to the physician and passed him to the sleeping woman, and I have always thought chiefly to me, the poor child. Her mother's heart, I fear. Isolde's line was never strong. And she turned and went back up the gallery at her unhurried pace, her ladies folding in behind her, and left the sentence hanging in the corridor behind her like a scent. Isolde's line was never strong. There it was again, the story, laid down another course, another brick. The dead queen had died of a long illness. Now her daughter had a weak heart from the same line, a family simply prone to failing, God's own sad arrangement, no hand in it anywhere. And Master Fenwick had said asterisk turns before, and I had never seen a turn, and a needle had gone into her arm, and her breath smelled of almonds, and her first word was asterisk, don't let them give me the cup. I came off the watch at 6, and I did not go to my bed. I went instead down through the servants' stair to the kitchens, because a man who wishes to understand what a person has been given must start where the giving is done, and because I had thought of something on the long-standing hours, and it would not let me rest. Elara took the same things each morning. I had watched her take them from my post for 2 whole seasons without ever once truly seeing them, the way you stop seeing a thing that is always there. A tray, brought to the terrace by the same girl, set on the same stone table beneath the pears. A pot of the tisane the princess favored, chamomile and something green and bitter she said settled her before she read, a small dish of dried fruit, and a cup. Always the same cup, hers, a pale one banded in silver, a gift I had heard from her mother. Don't let them give me the cup. The kitchen was in the ugly bright bustle of a house feeding 200 people who had all had a fright, and no one questioned a guardsman leaning in a doorway. Guardsmen lean in doorways. It is half of what we are for. I found the girl who carried the princess's morning tray. Her name was Nella, and she was frightened before I said a word. The whole kitchen was frightened. A princess down was every servant's nightmare. They would all be questioned and some of them dismissed, and I made my voice easy and I asked her only ordinary things. Who set the princess's tray? Where the tisane was steeped? Whether it was always the same? And Nella, glad to be asked something she could answer, told me. The tray was set on the long deal table by the still-room door, and it stood there some minutes each morning while she finished the dried fruit and found the honey. And the tisane was made not by her, but sent down ready in its pot from the queen consort's own still-room. Because Nella lowered her voice, proud of the intimacy of the knowledge. The queen consort had taken such a kindly interest in the princess's health this last month, and had insisted the poor delicate lady's morning draught be made under her own eye, from her own herbs, as a mark of a stepmother's care. I thanked the girl. I gave her a coin so she would remember the kindness and not the questions. And I climbed back up out of the warm, bright kitchen into the cold of the upper house, with the coal in my chest gone from warm to burning, because now I had a hand. The queen consort made the princess's morning draught, from her own herbs, under her own eye. This last month, the very month I would learn in which Master Fenwick had begun, in his careful notes, to record a princess's asterisk turns that no one but a physician in the queen's confidence had ever witnessed. A story and a cup, laid down together, brick and mortar, a month in the building. And this morning the cup had done its work at last, and a woman had gone gray and cold on the gravel, and if a guardsman with a nose trained in a country he does not name had not been standing the east terrace, she would have struck the stone, and the story would have closed over her like water, her mother's heart. Isolde's line was never strong. This is the place where a lesser telling would have me stride to the king that same night and lay it all before him. I did not, and the not doing was the hardest discipline of my life. I had no proof. I had a smell, which no court will hang a queen on. I had a needle mark a physician could name a dozen innocent things. I had a servant's gossip that the queen made a tisane out of kindness, which was, on its face, kindness. And I had a sick woman's babble, don't let them give me the cup asterisk, which the same physician would call the raving of a failing heart. Every thread in my hand could be cut with one word by the most powerful, most beloved woman in the realm, and the man accusing would be a guardsman with 11 years' service, and a rifle he could not load, who had, note it well, been the last person to hold the princess's body before it was laid on a bed. If I spoke and could not prove, Morwenna would not even need to defend herself. She would only turn that warm, bottomless look on the king and wonder aloud, so gently, whether the guardsman who was so very near the princess, so quick to catch her, so eager to stand her door, whether he might not be more tangled in this sad affair than a loyal man should be. And I would be gone, and Elara would be alone again with her cup. No, if I was to save her, I had to do it the way a guardsman does everything, by standing where I was told, seeing everything, moving not 1 inch before the true moment, and then moving without hesitation and without mercy. I had to catch the hand as I had caught the woman, at the exact instant it committed, with no space for it to pretend it had never reached. So I did the coldest and most necessary thing. I decided to let the cup be poured again. Not with the poison in it, God forgive me. I am not telling you I risked her life a second time. I will come to how that was managed. But I decided that the way to break the story was not to shout that the cup was false. It was to prove it. And to prove it, I needed the hand to reach for the cup one more time, in front of eyes it could not blind. I needed to turn the queen consort's own patience against her, to make her think the story was working, the princess fading of her mother's heart on schedule, so that the hand would not stop, so that it would come again. For the poison had not finished its work, and a patient poisoner always comes again. And I needed to be the only man in the realm who knew the cup was watched. I went to the crown prince that night. It was the single most dangerous thing I did, and I did it because he had said stay near her, and because a man cannot walk this road alone, and because if I had misjudged him, if Rowan too were somehow in the shadow of it, then Elara was already lost and my caution changed nothing. So I judged him. I looked at his straight gray eyes, and I remembered him at 9 years old weeping at his mother's coffin and refusing to be led away. And I staked a princess's life on the reading, and I asked to speak to him alone. And in the cold of his private study, with the door shut and one candle between us, I told the Crown Prince Rowan of Harrogate everything. The needlemark, the almonds, the coached physician, the Queen's own herbs, the month of invented turns, and his sister's first waking word. I laid it all on the table between us like a hand of cards a man knows may cost him his head. And the prince listened without once moving, in a stillness I recognized because it was my own, the stillness of a man holding a great and terrible weight so that it does not show in his face. And when I had finished, he was silent so long the candle guttered, and then he said, in a voice gone very quiet and very old for 22, I have thought it for a month and been ashamed to think it. I watched her fade and I told myself I was a fearful fool, and you, his jaw worked, you were watching too from a door, and you saw what I could not let myself see. He looked at me then, and I have been looked at by kings and by killers, and I have never been looked at quite like that. What do you need? 3 things, I said. The first is the physician. Master Fenwick is either a liar or a fool, and I must know which, because a fool can be turned and a liar must be watched. The second is the cup. I need it to keep coming, and I need it emptied before it reaches her lips, so that the hand does not stop and the princess does not swallow one more grain of what it carries. The third, I hesitated because the third was the largest. The third is time, my lord, and I do not know how much of it we have. Poison that means a death to look like a heart does not need to hurry, but it does not stop either. She will be given the cup again the moment she is thought well enough to take it. We must be ready before that morning, and I cannot say which morning it will be. Rowan rose and went to the dark window and stood with his back to me, and the candle put his shadow long across the books. Fenwick, he said at last. Start with Fenwick. If he is bought, I want to know by whom, and I want it in his own mouth. Can you get it? I said I thought I could, if the prince would give me one thing his rank commanded that mine did not. The right to be in a room where a guardsman had no business, without a servant thinking to report it. He gave it to me, a token, a signet pressed into a scrap of wax, the crown prince's man, admit and ask nothing. And it was worth more to me in that house than a loaded rifle, and I have kept the wax to this day, cracked now in a drawer, the way another man keeps a medal. I went to Master Fenwick the next dawn, before the house was up, and I did not accuse him of anything. That is the mistake a young man makes and an old guardsman does not. You do not open with the blow. You open with the door left ajar, and you let the frightened thing walk through it on its own legs. I found him in the physician's rooms grinding something with a pestle, and his hands were not steady, and there were shadows under his eyes that a man who sleeps easy does not wear. I stood a while and let him feel me standing, and then I said, quite gently, How is she this morning, master? Resting, he said too quickly. The heart is quieter, she will do well enough with care. With her draught, I said. The pestle stopped. With the queen consort's kind draught, I went on in the same gentle voice, watching him the way you watch a hare that has not yet decided to run, that the princess is to have the moment she is thought well enough, from the queen's own herbs. under the queen's own eye. I let it sit. Then softer still, Master Fenwick, I caught her. I had her cold in my arms in that garden, and I felt her heart run, and I smelled her breath. And I am not a physician, and I know nothing, and I am only a guardsman who will forget every word said in this room the moment he leaves it, but I have smelled that smell before in another country on another cup, and the man who drank it did not have a weak heart. He had an enemy. I stopped. Is that what she has, master, a weak heart, or an enemy? The old man set the pestle down very carefully, as though it might break, or as though he might. He did not look at me. He looked at his own hands, and they were shaking now openly, and when he spoke his voice had gone to a thread. I have written asterisk turns of the heart in my book 4 times this month, he said. I have written them because I was told a princess had them, and shown notes of them in a hand not my own, and asked, so kindly, so reasonably, only to concur, only to lend my name to a truth already known for the family's peace. And I concurred. God forgive me, I concurred, because I am an old man and I have a daughter, and the queen consort is very kind and very powerful, and I made myself not ask what the concurring was asterisk for. He put a hand over his eyes. And yesterday I knelt on the gravel and I felt what you felt, and I said, the heart, because it was the word I had already been given to say, and I saw your face when I said it, and I have not slept since. I am not a poisoner, guardsman, I swear it on my daughter, but I have been a coward, and a coward who signs his name is not so very far from a poisoner, is he? Not so very far at all. I had my answer, a fool, not a liar. A bought fool is the most useful thing in the world to a man building a trap, because a bought fool who has just found his conscience will do anything to buy it back. I did not comfort him. Comfort is a thing you spend, and I meant to spend it where it would buy the most. You can be very far from a poisoner, master, I said, or you can be one. That is the only choice left you, and you make it this morning. Here is how you make it far. And I told him what I needed. He would go on exactly as before. He would tell the queen consort when she asked, and she would ask, that the princess mended well and would be fit to resume her morning draught within the week, perhaps sooner, that her heart, thank God, had weathered the worst of the turn and only wanted its accustomed care. He would let the story stand, let the cup be readied, let the hand feel safe. And in return, he would from this day forward bring me, quietly in the physician's own hand, sealed, a true record, every draught the queen sent down, when, in what quantity, and if he could contrive to take a few drops of each before it went up, a sample. You concurred in the lie once to keep your name, I said. Now you will keep the truth in your book alongside it, sealed, so that, when the day comes, there is a physician's honest hand to answer the physician's frightened one. That is how a coward becomes a witness, master. And a witness is the one thing in this world your queen cannot poison. He wept a little, an old man's dry weeping, and then he steadied and he said he would do it, and I believed him, because I had left him no door to walk through but that one, and I had watched him choose it with his own legs. That was the physician turned, now for the cup. Here is the thing I have never told plainly, because it is the part where I gambled with a princess's life, and I am not proud of the gamble, only of the outcome. I could not simply throw out every draught. If the draught stopped reaching the princess at all, the poisoner would know she was watched, and a watched poisoner does not stop. A watched poisoner changes, to a knife in the dark, to a fall on a stair, to a thing far harder to catch than a cup. The cup was, in a terrible way, our safety. So long as Morwenna believed the slow, patient poison was working, she would not reach for a faster, uglier tool. So the cup had to keep coming, and had to keep seeming to be drunk, and had to never once actually be drunk. And the only person who could make that true was the princess herself. Which meant Elara had to be told. And Elara, when I stood her door on the 4th day in Surrey's, whom I had at last taken into the smallest circle, because a sister who never leaves the room is the best guard a bedside can have, brought me in past the drawn curtains under the crown prince's wax, was a woman I had to be very sure of before I put her own survival into her own trembling hands. She was propped on pillows, thin and gray-lipped still but her eyes clear, and when she saw me, the guardsman in her chamber, an impossible thing, she did not startle. She looked at me the way she had looked at nothing on the garden path, that listening look, and she said, before I had said one word, "You're the one who caught me." "I am, my lady." "I dropped my book," she said, and a ghost of something crossed her face, and I understood it was the beginning of a smile and the end of a very great fear meeting in the same muscle. "I remember dropping my book, and then I remember your voice telling me to stay. You told me to stay." Her clear eyes filled and did not spill. "I've been trying to stay for a month, guardsman. Ever since the morning started making me ill, and everyone kept telling me it was my heart and being so gentle about it, so terribly gentle, the way you're gentle with someone you've already decided is going to die." Her hand closed on the coverlet. "They've decided I'm going to die, haven't they? I can hear it in how kind they've all become. I have stood at coffins. I have carried the wounded. I have never in my life heard anything harder to bear than a young woman saying, in a steady voice, that she had heard the household decide her death in the softening of its manners. And I made a decision, then, that was against every scrap of protocol I had ever obeyed. I told her the whole truth, all of it, needle and almond and cup and queen, standing in her chamber with my bearskin under my arm. Because a woman fighting for her life has a right to know the shape of the thing that is trying to end it, and because a lie of kindness is exactly the weapon that had been used against her for a month, and I would not add mine to it. She took it without a sound. When I finished, she was quiet a long while, looking at her own hands, at the fading yellow-green mark on the inside of her forearm, where she told me, lo, a physician's assistant she did not know had come one evening a fortnight past and taken blood to test the strength of her heart, and she had thought nothing of it, and now she knew it had not been for testing at all but for asterisk marking, for building the record, for the needle story that would sit beside the cup story in the book. And when she had turned it all over, Princess Elara of the royal house of Harrogate looked up at me, and there was no more fear in her face. There was something I had only ever seen in the faces of good soldiers on the morning of a bad day. "Tell me what to do," she said, "so that she is caught and not just stopped. I don't want her stopped. Stopped, she'll only wait and try again when you've all grown tired of guarding me. I want her caught in front of my father, with her own hand around the cup." Her jaw set, and in that set I saw the dead Queen Isolde, whose portraits watched us both from the walls of that house, the mother whose strong line Morwenna had been so busy calling weak. I nearly died in that garden. I am not going to spend the rest of my life afraid of a teapot. Tell me what to do. So I told her. The plan was simple, because simple plans are the only ones that survive contact with a clever enemy. She would recover, visibly, believably, at the pace a woman recovers from a hard turn of the heart, not too fast, for a poisoner who sees her prey leap up whole grows suspicious. She would, when Master Fenwick judged her strong enough and the Queen was sure to hear of it, resume her morning walk in the garden, and her morning tray beneath the pears, and her cup, and she would appear to drink it. That was the whole art of it, and it fell entirely on her. To raise the pale silver-banded cup, to touch it to her lips, to tilt it, and to let not one drop pass, to spill it soundlessly into the folded napkin in her lap, or into the roots of the box hedge at her knee, or into a small flask I would find a way to keep in her sleeve, and to set the cup down empty and to grow, over the following hour, a little wan, a little breathless, a little gray about the mouth. To play the poison she was not swallowing, to let Morwenna watch her fade on schedule. "You are asking me to act the part of my own murder," Elara said, and I said, "Yes, my lady. That is exactly what I am asking, and it is a monstrous thing to ask, and I am ashamed to ask it." And she said with the ghost smile again, "Don't be ashamed. It's the first time in a month anyone has asked me to do asterisk something instead of lie still and be pitied. I'd rather act my death than sleep through it." And I understood then that I had not, in fact, given this woman a terrible burden. I had given her back her own life to fight for, which was the one thing the whole gentle household had been quietly taking from her, and she seized it with both thin hands. Meanwhile, and this is the part the ballad makers leave out, because it is unglamorous and it was the true work, I built the trap around the cup. A single spilled draught proves nothing. A woman may tip a cup by accident. What I needed was a chain no one could break. The herbs leaving more when a still room, the draught brewed under her eye, the pot carried down and up by hands I could name, the cup filled. And this was the keystone, the poison found in the cup after Elara appeared to drink, by an honest witness in the same hour, so that no one could say the poison had been added later by the accusers. The whole thing had to close in a single morning, in daylight, with the king present, or it closed on nothing. So through the days of Elara's slow, feigned mending, I did the patient, ugly labor of it. I learned the herbs. Master Fenwick, honest now and half alive with the terror and relief of a coward turned witness, brought me each night, sealed in his own careful hand, a few drops of that morning's undelivered draught. For the princess did not take it yet. She was still too weak. And so the queen's still-room sent it down, and it sat, and Fenwick could bleed a little from each pot before it was poured away. And Fenwick tested it quietly by the old methods a physician knows. A bright silver coin left in it overnight went dull and dark. A drop set on a certain paper bloomed a color it should not. And when he warmed a little and passed the vapor beneath his own old nose, he went white and set it down and said, "Bitter almonds. You were right. God help us all, guardsmen, you were right. There is enough here to fell a horse over a month, and it is dressed in chamomile so a woman would never taste it under the honey." He kept every drop, sealed and dated and signed, in a locked case whose key hung on a cord under his shirt. The record, the witness, the thing she could not poison. And I learned the still room. This was the most dangerous of all, and I did it only twice, at the deepest hour of the night, on the crown prince's wax, moving through the queen consort's own quarter like a shadow with a heartbeat. More when a still room was a pretty deceiving place. Dried flowers in bunches, copper pans, a wall of little labeled drawers, all the innocent apparatus of a great lady's kindly hobby. But a guardsman is taught to see the one thing arranged to be overlooked, and in the second drawer from the bottom, behind the marjoram, was a small stoppered jar of pale powder with no label at all, and beside it a slim silver spoon worn bright with use. I did not touch either. I did not want my gloves oil where a clever woman might find it, but I looked long enough to fix it in memory forever, and I came away, and told the crown prince, and told Fenwick, and now 4 people knew the shape of the thing and where it hid, and I began at last to believe we might live. That was the midpoint, if a life may be said to have one, the balance point where the falling turns to rising. And of course it was exactly there that everything grew harder, because that is the law of such things. It grew harder because of the children. Malin was 9, and Malin missed nothing, and Malin loved her Aunt Elara with the whole fierce heart of a solemn little girl, who preferred a quiet reading aunt to the whole loud glittering court. And Malin had noticed, in the way children notice the weather of a house, that something in Harrogate had gone wrong, that the grown people had all begun to speak softly and smile too much, and that her aunt, whom she had watched fall in the garden from a nursery window, and about whom she had wept for 3 nights, was being treated like a candle everyone expected to go out. And Malin, being 9 and unable to bear it, had begun to do a dangerous thing. She had begun to watch, with a child's tireless attention, and to ask questions, and, worst of all, to bring her aunt little gifts of protection in the artless way of children. A pressed flower for luck, a pebble shaped like a heart, so yours get stronger. And one morning, standing my post outside the garden while Elara sat at her tray beneath the pears playing her slow feigned poison for a stepmother she knew was watching from a high window, I saw the little Princess Malin come skipping down the path with something cupped in both hands, calling, "Aunt Elara. Aunt Elara, I brought you a present. Don't drink your medicine yet. I made you a nicer one." And in the child's cupped hands was a little cup of her own, a nursery cup, filled with garden mint she had picked and crushed in water, a 9-year-old's loving idea of a healing draught. and she was going to make her aunt drink hers instead, in front of the high window, in front of the watching hand, at the exact wrong moment. And if Elara refused it, the child would be hurt and puzzled and would say so loudly. And if Elara took it, the whole rhythm of the feigned poisoning would break in a way a clever watcher would not fail to read. I have never moved on the mortal battlefield of a war, and I do not know how I would fare there. But I know that no order I have ever obeyed cost me what it cost to stand still at that post, and not run to the child, not snatch the cup, not do the one loud instinctive protective thing, because the loud thing would have told the watcher at the high window that this garden was a stage and everyone on it an actor. So I did the only thing discipline left me. I caught Elara's eye across the garden. She had seen the child too. She had gone white, and I gave her, with the smallest tilt of my chin, a signal we had agreed for exactly this. For the unforeseen, the signal that meant your move, my lady. I cannot make it for you. Save it yourself. And I watched a poisoned princess who was pretending to be dying save her own small niece's love and the whole trap in a single breath. She held out her arms and gathered the little girl in and took the nursery cup with a cry of delight. "Oh, Mint, my darling, my favorite asterisk. However did you know?" And she drank the child's harmless mint water down to the leaves, all of it greedily, and set the child on her knee and praised the drink to the skies and said that a present from Malin was better medicine than anything a physician could brew, and that she would keep the little cup by her bed always. And the child glowed. And the high window's shape did not move, satisfied, no doubt, that the princess drank whatever pretty thing was set before her, a sick trusting woman fading on schedule. And only I and Elara knew that a princess had just swallowed a whole cup of cold mint water to keep a 9-year-old from ever learning that anyone had wanted her aunt dead, and had, in the same motion, poured her own untouched poison cup, quite naturally, into the box hedge while the child was folded against her chest, and set it down empty, exactly on schedule, so that the morning's playing was not spoiled but perfected. I could have wept with the beauty and the horror of it. That is what a garden had come to. That is the house it fell into. But the children were a danger the trap could not hold much longer, and I knew it. Because Morwenna, too, watched the children, watched them harder now than before, I had come to see, and I had begun to understand why, and the understanding turned my stomach in a way even the almonds had not. Elara was the eldest of Isolde's line at court, unmarried, beloved, a rallying point. With Elara gone of a sad, weak heart, the household's grief would settle, and the story of Isolde's line was never strong would sink into the family's bones as accepted fact. And then, in a year or two, when another of that line took a turn, it would surprise no one. The poison of Elara was not only aimed at Elara. It was the first stone of a wall, and the wall was meant, in the slow, patient end of it, to fence out every child of Isolde's blood from between Morwenna's own son Cassius and the throne. I do not say I proved this in a court. I say I came to know it the way you know a cold front is coming, by the whole sky. And knowing it, I could no longer play the long, patient game of the spilled cup, morning after careful morning, waiting for a witness day to assemble itself. Because a woman building a wall does not stop at one stone, and every morning Elara pretended to fade was a morning nearer the one where Morwenna, satisfied the poison worked, would decide it was working too slowly, and reach for the powder itself, the pale unlabeled jar, and increase the dose to a killing one all at once to be done with it. I found that out on the 11th day. Master Fenwick came to me gray-faced before dawn with the sealed sample of that night's draft, and this one, he said, his old hands shaking so the vial rattled, was stronger, near twice the strength of the first he'd tested, the chamomile thickened to hide it, the coin gone black as pitch by the small hours. "She is losing patience," he whispered. "The Queen. She means to finish it. This is not a month's slow dose any more, guardsmen. This is a killing cup, and it will go up to the princess's tray the very next morning she is thought strong enough to walk in the garden, which, God forgive me, on my own honest word, is tomorrow." Tomorrow, the killing cup tomorrow. And the trap not yet sprung, the king not yet placed, the witness mourning not yet built. We had run out of the one thing I had told the crown prince I could not measure. We had run out of time. I went a rowin' before the sun was up, and I laid the black-coined vial and Fenwick's word on his table, and I told him what it meant. That tomorrow's cup was a killing cup, and that if Elara so much as pretended to fade one shade too little from it, Morwenna would know the play, and if Elara truly drank it, she would be dead by noon. And that we could not stop the cup from being sent without warning the poisoner she was watched, but that we could not in conscience let it reach the garden at all, because a killing dose has no safe margin for spilling. One splash on the lip, one drop, and a woman is lost. The slow game was over. We could not afford another patient mourning. The trap had to spring tomorrow in that garden with the king present, or it did not spring at all. And here is where it looked, for one gray hour, as though it could not be done. The false dawn every hard morning has, where the reasonable middle path opens up and begs you to take it. Because Rowan, white to the lips, said the reasonable thing. He said, "Then we do not risk her. We do not play tomorrow. I go to my father tonight, this hour, and I tell him everything, and we arrest Morwenna before the cup is ever brewed." And it was the sane and loving and reasonable course, and it was exactly the course that would have lost us everything, and I had to be the man who stood in a frightened brother's path and told him no. "My lord," I said, "if you go to the king tonight with a needle mark and a smell and a coward's confession, and a jar you cannot swear I did not plant, the queen consort will weep, and she will be believed, because she is beloved and clever, and you are a grieving boy who has decided his stepmother is a murderer. And the king, forgive me, the king is a man who has already lost one wife to a slow illness, and cannot bear to believe a hand was in his house. He will want it to be a fearful son's mistake. She will give him that want, wrapped in tears, and by morning the physician will have recanted from terror, and I will be dismissed, and your sister will be alone with a woman who now knows she is hunted. You will not have saved Elara. You will have signaled the hunter and taken away her guard. No." I held his eyes. "The only thing that beats a beloved liar is her own hand, caught reaching, in front of the one man she has spent 2 years persuading, not our word against hers. Her deed in daylight with no room to say it never happened. We do not cancel tomorrow, my lord. We win it, but we take the danger out of it every grain tonight." He was silent, and I watched the brother in him war with the future king, and the future king win, which is a hard and lonely thing to watch a young man do. "How?" he said. "How do we take a killing dose out of a cup that must still look full and still be brewed under her eye and still reach the garden?" "We don't take it out of the pot," I said. "We take it out of the cup. Listen." And I gave him the plan that had come to me in the black hour before dawn, the plan that was the whole hinge of everything. And I give it to you now plainly so that, when the morning comes, you will understand exactly what you are watching. For a trap, you understand, is twice as sweet to see close. The poison was in the pot. The tisane brewed under Morwenna's eye, carried down and up, poured out into Elara's cup at the garden table by the serving girl Nella. That we could not touch. It had to be genuine, had to be the real killing draught, because the whole proof turned on it being tested after and found deadly. But between the pot and Elara's lips stood the cup, her own pale silver-banded cup, and the cup we could touch, because the cup lived not in the queen's still room but in the princess's own keeping, on the shelf by her bed, in a chamber I had guarded and Surrey's never left. So tonight we would take Elara's cup, and we would give it to Master Fenwick, and Fenwick, an honest physician now, working through the small hours by candle, would line its inner curve invisibly with a thin dried glaze of a harmless substance he knew, a preparation that did one single wonderful thing. On contact with the poison in that particular draught, it turned within a minute, a deep and unmistakable and undeniable blue. Not a subtle blue. A blue like a bruise, a blue like ink, a blue that would climb the inside of a pale cup the instant the poisoned tisane was poured into it, and would be seen by every eye at that garden table, the king's eyes above all. Do you see it? The cup would betray the pot. Morwenna would brew her killing draught under her own careful eye and send it down sure of it, and it would be poured by an innocent girl, in daylight before the king, into a cup that the poison itself turned accusing blue. Elara would never drink one drop, never even lift it. The moment the tisane struck the treated cup and bloomed that blue, the morning was won, with the poison's own chemistry as the witness that could not be dismissed or made to recant. The hand that brewed it would have nowhere in the wide world to hide. And the king, I said, the king must be there. Not summoned to a scene, Morwenna would smell a summons. He must be there of his own accord in the garden at Elara's tray, so that when the cup turns he sees it with his own eyes and no one can ever tell him he was shown a trick. My lord, that is the one thing your rank can do that mine cannot. Get your father to that garden tomorrow morning. Get him to his daughter's side at the hour of her tray. And leave the rest to a physician, a princess, and a guardsman who has been waiting 11 years for a morning worth standing still for. Rowan looked at me a long, long moment, and then he did a thing no prince had ever done to me, and I do not expect one ever will again. He took my gloved hand in both of his and gripped it hard, the way a drowning man grips the arm that reaches him, and he said only, "My mother's line was never weak. Prove it in front of him. Prove it so he can never unsee it." And he went out into the last of the dark to find a way to walk his grieving father into a garden. That night was the longest of my service. I stood the princess's door, as I had every night, so that nothing about my post should change and betray us. But behind the door the war was fought. Ceres brought me the pale silver-banded cup, wrapped in a napkin at the darkest hour, and I carried it down the servant's stair under the crown prince's wax to the physician's rooms, where old Fenwick waited with his candle, and his cowardice burned all the way out of him now, only the honest craftsman left. And I watched an old man's steady hands steady now, steadier than they had been in a month, because a man doing right is steadier than a man doing wrong, paint the inside of a princess's cup with a glaze so thin and so clear that when it dried you could not have told, holding it to the light, that anything had touched it at all. He turned it in his fingers. He held it to me. "You would swear it was clean," he said. "So will she. That is the whole art of it. She must pour her poison into a cup she believes is only a cup." He wrapped it again in its napkin. "It will turn within the minute. I have tested it 3 times tonight on the sample, blue as a winter sky. There is no draught of chamomile and honey on this earth that turns a cup that color, only the thing she has hidden in it. When the king sees it, guardsman, he will not be able to unknow it. You have built a witness she cannot silence, and I," his old voice cracked, "I get to help build it instead of signing her lie. Thank you. Whatever comes of the morning to me, thank you for that." I carried the cup back up the dark stair and gave it to Ceres, and she set it on the shelf by her sister's bed exactly where it had always stood, in the exact angle of its own faint ring of dust, so that no maid, no watcher, no clever eye could see that it had ever left the room. And then I stood the door until dawn, with a princess sleeping behind it and a killing morning coming toward us all across the dark, and I did the thing I am best at in the whole world, the only thing, the thing that is either the smallest gift a man can give or the largest, depending on the day. I stood still, and I watched, and I waited for the true moment to move. It came with the sun. The morning broke clear and gold, the way it had broken on the day she fell, the pears heavy overhead, the dew burning off the box, the whole garden pretending, as gardens do, that nothing had ever gone wrong in it and nothing ever could. Elara came down the gravel path a little slowly, a little pale, genuinely pale, for she had not slept. None of us had, with Ceres at her shoulder and her book against her hip, and God bless her nerve, the child's little nursery cup carried openly in her hand, kept as she had promised, a talisman. She sat at the stone table beneath the pears. And I stood my post at the terrace rail with my rifle at my shoulder and my face a wall. And inside the wall my heart went like a drum, because everything now depended on things I could not control, on a serving girl's ordinary morning, on a poisoner's confidence, and on whether the crown prince had gotten his grieving father out of doors. He had. King Alaric came down the terrace steps a little after his daughter on his son's arm, and I understood at a glance how Rowan had done it. Not with a summons, not with an alarm, but with the one lure a grieving man cannot refuse. Come and sit with her, father, in the garden in the sun, while she is well enough to enjoy it, for we do not know how many such mornings we are given. It was cruel, and it was true, and it was exactly right. The king came slow and gray through his own grief, a good man moving through the gray glass, and he did not know he was walking into the most important morning of his reign. He thought he was stealing a quiet hour with a daughter he feared he was losing. He sat at the stone table across from Elara in the gold light, and he took her thin hand, and something in his shuttered face eased a little at the warmth of it, and I saw Elara have to fight not to weep, because her father had not held her hand in a month of being treated like a candle. And then Queen Consort Morwenna came down into the garden. She had not been summoned either. She came, I am sure, because a poisoner on the morning of her killing dose cannot bear not to watch. The whole patient month came due this morning, and a hand that has waited so long must be present at the harvest of its own long sowing. She came in pale morning silk, warm and lovely and terrible, and stopped at the edge of the little scene, the king, the princess, the prince, and smiled at all of it and said, in a voice like sunlight, "What a picture! The whole family in the garden. Elara, my dear, you look so much stronger this morning, doesn't she, Alaric?" And she stood, and did not sit near the king's shoulder where she could see everything, where she could see the cup. And Nella came down the path with the tray. I want to hold this moment, because I have held it every day of my life since. The serving girl came down the gravel with the morning tray, entirely innocent, knowing nothing, carrying under a linen cloth the pot brewed that dawned under the queen consort's own eye, the killing pot, twice strength, the chamomile thickened to hide the almond, the coin-blackening death of it, and beside the pot, the pale silver-banded cup that had stood on Elara's shelf all night and been carried down a dark stair, and painted by an honest old man, and carried back, and set in its own ring of dust. Nella set the tray on the stone table. She lifted the pot. And in the gold morning light, with the king holding his daughter's hand and the queen smiling at the princess's shoulder and a guardsman standing perfectly still at the rail, the girl poured the queen consort's kindly draught into the princess's cup. I counted the seconds in my head, the way I count everything. 1, the tisane went in, pale gold and steaming, chamomile sweet, and Elara's hand rose to take the cup, and I saw her make herself lift it, make herself begin the little play of drinking, because she did not know, none of us had been able to tell her surely, how long the minute would be, and she meant to buy it with the play if she had to. 2, the queen's eyes were on the cup, only the cup. That warm, bottomless attention narrowed to the pale rim rising toward a princess's lips, and there was, for one instant, on the most beloved face in the realm, an expression I will not describe as anything but appetite. The look of a woman watching a thing she has worked at for a month finally begin to happen. 3, and the cup turned blue. It climbed the inside of the pale porcelain like a stain of ink poured into water, like a bruise blooming under skin, fast and deep and impossible, a blue that had no business in a cup of chamomile and honey, and every business in a cup of death. Fenwick's honest chemistry answering Morwenna's hidden powder the only way it could, by shouting, in color, in daylight, in front of the king's own eyes, "There is poison here." Elara did not drink. She set the cup down. She did not fling it. She did not cry out. She set it down slowly on the stone with a small, clean click, the blue climbing higher inside it every second, and she looked not at the cup and not at her father but straight up the garden at Queen Consort Morwenna, and she said, in a voice that did not shake, that carried, that was her dead mother's voice living in her throat, "It's blue, madam. Why is my cup blue?" And the whole gold morning stopped. The king looked at the cup. I watched him look at it. I have watched it 1,000 times since in the dark behind my eyes. I watched a grieving man's gaze fall on the pale cup of his daughter's morning draught and find it filled with a blue that no draught on earth makes, and I watched him not understand, and then begin to understand, and then refuse to understand, and then be unable to refuse. His hand was still around Elara's. I saw it tighten. I saw him turn his head, slowly, terribly, the way a man turns his head toward the one thing he has spent every day for a month arranging not to see, and he turned it toward his wife. Morwenna's face had not yet fallen. That is the thing I marked, the thing that damned her past all saving. In the instant the cup turned, before her mouth could arrange itself, her clever, beautiful face was caught bare, and what was bare on it was not a wife's blank confusion. It was calculation. It was a mind moving very fast toward an exit. It was the face of someone who has heard the trap close and is already reaching for the lie, and everyone at that table, the king above all, saw that face for the half-second before the arranged one came down over it, and half a second is enough, when it is your own eyes and your own mourning and your own daughter's poisoned cup. "How strange," Morwenna said, and her voice was almost perfect, almost only a hair too smooth, a hair too ready. "Some flaw in the porcelain, surely. A stain in the glaze. Elara, my dear, you mustn't drink it, of course. How fortunate you noticed. I'll have a fresh cup brought at once." And she reached, so naturally, so helpfully, her lovely hand going out toward the blue cup to take it away, to remove it, to make it gone before anyone could think. And it was the single most incriminating motion I have ever seen a human being make. A hand reaching to make the evidence disappear, and I had been waiting 11 years for exactly one moment, and this was it. I moved. I crossed the garden between the Queen's reaching hand and the cup faster than I have ever crossed anything, and I did not touch her. A guardsman does not lay a hand on the Queen Consort, not even now, not even here. And I did not need to. I simply set my white glove flat over the blue cup, covering it, guarding it, my rifle still on my shoulder and my body between her hand and the proof. And I said to the king, not to her, in the level voice I had held for a month, "Your Majesty, nothing must touch this cup until it is tested. It is evidence." And then, because the moment demanded the whole truth spoken plain and I had earned the right to speak it, "This is the cup that was poured for the princess this morning, from the pot brewed in the Queen Consort's still room, under the Queen Consort's own eye, from the Queen Consort's own herbs, as it has been brewed every morning for a month. The princess did not fall of her heart, sire. She fell of this. And I caught her in this garden 13 days ago, and I have smelled it on her breath, and there is an honest physician with the whole of it sealed and dated in his own hand. And this cup is turning blue, because there is enough poison in that pot to kill a horse. And the only reason your daughter is alive to ask you why it is blue is that she has been pretending, every morning, to drink her own murder, and pouring it into your hedges, and waiting for you to be standing here to see the truth with your own eyes. Test the pot, sire, test it now. Do not take my word, do not take hers, take the cups. I have served King Alaric for 11 years, and I had never once heard him raise his voice. He did not raise it now. But something came into his face in that garden that I had not seen there since before Queen Isolde died. The king came back into the grieving man, all at once, the way a fire comes back when you least look for it, and he rose from the stone bench to his full height, still holding his daughter's hand, and he said one word, quiet as a closing door. "Fenwick." And Master Fenwick came out from behind the terrace balustrade, where he had waited on the crown prince's arrangement since before dawn, with his locked case in his hands and the key on its cord about his neck. And he came down into the garden, an old coward walking like a young man, straight-backed, the honest thing in him standing up at last to its full height, and he knelt by the stone table and opened his case. And he did before the king, in the gold morning light, the thing he had done 3 times in the night. He took a bright silver coin and he laid it in the pot of the Queen Consort's kindly draught and he set it in the sun. And while it darkened, he took a drop of the same pot on his white paper, and it bloomed the color it should not. And he warmed a little in a dish and passed the vapor beneath the king's own nose and said, in the steady voice of a witness who has burned all his fear away. Bitter almonds, sire. Concealed in chamomile, enough to kill. I have 4 sealed samples of the same, taken over 11 days, each stronger than the last. It is in my case, in my hand, dated and signed. I concurred in a lie about the princess's heart because I was a frightened old man. I will not concur in her death. This is poison. It was brewed under the queen consort's eye, and that is the whole and honest truth, as God will judge me for it. The coin came up out of the pot black as pitch. The king looked at the black coin in the physician's hand. He looked at the blue cup under my white glove. He looked at his daughter, thin and gray-lipped and alive, and holding his hand with a grip like a woman who has decided to live. And then last, he looked at his wife, at Queen Consort Morwenna, standing in her pale mourning silk in the ruin of her month of patience. And I watched the king of Eldermore understand, completely and finally, and past all the 2 years of tears she had wrapped him in, exactly what had been done in his house, to his blood, by the woman he had been grateful to. She tried once more. I will give her that. She was made of iron under the silk, and she did not faint or weep or fall to her knees. She lifted her chin and she said, "Alaric, you cannot believe a guardsman and a broken old physician and a hysterical girl who has, by her own account, been pouring things into hedges. This is a plot against me, husband. They have contrived this. The cup is treated asterisk. He as good as said so. He painted my innocent cup to turn blue, and now he blames the paint on me. And it was clever. It was very clever. It was the truth turned inside out and worn as a disguise." And for one breath, I saw it reach for purchase in the king's grief. And then Princess Elara stood up. She stood up from the stone bench, on her own legs, thin and pale and swaying a little and refusing the hand her sister put out. And she faced the woman who had called her mother's line weak for a month while trying to prove it in her blood, and she said, in that carrying voice that was Isolde living, "Yes, madam. The cup was treated to turn blue only when it met the poison you put in the pot. That is the whole of the plot against you, that we made a cup that could not lie. If your draught were only chamomile, it would still be pale gold in my hand. It is blue because you are what I have known you were since the first morning it made me ill, and no one would believe a fainting woman over a beloved queen. So I stopped being a fainting woman." She was shaking now, all over, with fury or weakness or both, and her father had risen to steady her and she let him, but her voice did not shake. "I pretended to die, madam, so that my father would live to see you do it. Every morning for 13 days I acted the part you wrote for me, and poured it out and grew gray on cue, and let you think it was working, so that you would grow bold and send a killing cup, and reach for it in front of him with your own hand, the way you just did. You did not lose to a guardsman and an old man and a hysterical girl. You lost to the 3 of us. And the crown you married will never be yours, because everyone in this garden just watched you reach to take away the proof." For a moment, no one in the whole gold garden breathed. And then the king spoke to his guard captain, who had come down at some signal of the crown prince's I had not seen given, and the words the king used were not loud and were not cruel and were the end of Queen Consort Morwenna as surely as an axe. "Confine her to her apartments," he said, "her son and her daughter to theirs, until it is known what they knew. Seal the still room. Take the physician's case and the cup and the pot into the keeping of 2 men who answer to me and to no one in this house but me and, Captain," his voice did not change, and that was the terror of it, "the guardsman keeps the cup until then. His glove has been the only honest thing over it. It stays his." They took her away. She went as she had come, unhurried, at the pace of a woman leaving a dinner. She would not give the garden the pleasure of seeing her hurry. But as she passed me close, I felt her stop for the half of a step, and she turned her beautiful ruined face to me, and she said, so low that only I could hear it, in the same warm voice she had used the first night at the princess's door, "I said I would remember your name." And I said nothing, because a wall does not answer, and she went on up the terrace steps between 2 guards into whatever was left of her life, which was a thing decided later, in rooms above my station, and which I will tell you the shape of before I am done. But first the small thing, the thing that is in no account of that morning, the thing I have carried longer than the blue cup or the black coin. When it was over, when Morwenna was gone up the steps and the household was pouring down into the garden in a rising storm of noise, the little Princess Malin came flying down the gravel from the nursery window where she had watched all of it, understanding only that her aunt had stood up and that something enormous had happened. She flung herself not at her father and not at her aunt, but, for reasons a child's heart alone knows, at me, at the guardsman, at the wall, and wrapped both arms around my leg and pressed her face to the red wool of my tunic and said, muffled and fierce, "You caught her. I saw you catch her. I've been telling everyone, and no one would listen." And I broke protocol for the second time in 13 days. I laid my white glove, the one that had guarded the cup, gently on that small head and crouched down, rifle and bearskin and all, to be level with her tear-streaked face. I did, little one, and your aunt caught her too in her own way. And you drank a whole cup of mint water on the worst morning of her life so she would smile. Do you know what that is? That is what a guard is, watching over someone so they are not afraid. You are a better guard than I am, and don't let anyone tell you different. And she looked at me with her whole 9-year-old soul and decided to believe it, and I have hoped ever since that she never stopped. That is the truth the man who caught her revealed. Not that she fell of her heart, that she was caught twice, 3 times by a guardsman and a physician and a child, and in the end, by her own fierce refusal to be quietly murdered and held up and not let break. The rest I will tell you quickly, the way an honest account should, without dressing it. The pot was tested by 3 physicians the king brought from outside the house, men who had never taken a coin from Morwenna and had no cause to lie, and they found what Fenwick had found. Enough of the almond poison to kill, hidden under chamomile, and traces of the same in 4 sealed samples, and in the unlabeled jar drawn from the second drawer of the queen consort's still-room. There was no story of Isolde's weak line left to hide behind. The chemistry did not care whom it accused. It only turned the coin black and the paper strange and the cup blue over and over for every man who asked it, and a queen cannot weep a coin white again. Queen Consort Morwenna was not executed. I will be honest that a part of me, the part that had smelled almonds on a dying woman's breath, wanted her to be. But the king was a better man than my anger, and there was the matter of scandal, and of the throne, and of not teaching the realm that its crowns were things that poisoned each other in gardens. So it was given out that the queen consort had fallen gravely ill, a nice irony, and I do not think it was lost on anyone who mattered, and had withdrawn to a distant house in the cold north of the country to convalesce, from which she did not return, and where she lived out her years under a quiet permanent guard, in comfort and in exile, never again within a day's ride of a child of Isolde's blood. Her marriage was quietly undone. Her son Cassius and her daughter Verena, when it was sifted out how much they had known, some, but not the worst, they had been kept as ignorant of the killing as the king himself, being useful only as heirs-in-waiting, were stripped of their standing at court and sent to live modestly on a small estate, watched and warned and forgotten, which for people who had dreamed of a throne was its own long punishment. Master Fenwick the king did not disgrace, though the old man begged for it. Alaric said, in my hearing, "A man who signs a lie in fear and then burns his own house down to unsign, it is more use to me than a man never tempted. You will keep your rooms and your title, and you will teach the young physicians one thing above all their medicine, that a doctor's first loyalty is to the body in the bed, and to no crown, no coin, and no kindness that asks him to look away. Now go and tend my daughter." And Fenwick went and tended her, and was, until he died an old and honored man 3 winters later, the most careful and least frightened physician the house of Harrogate ever kept. And Elara mended. It is a slow thing, mending from a month of poison, and she was never quite as strong after as before. The almond leaves its mark, and there were mornings her heart truly did trip and race, the ghost of the thing that had been done to her, but she mended, and she walked her garden path again beneath the pears, and she read her books on the stone bench, and she took her morning tisane, brewed now in the open kitchen by the girl Nella, who was given a purse and a place for her honest answering of a guardsman's questions on the worst day of them all. And I stood the east terrace as I had for 11 years, and watched over her mornings, and I will tell you that for a long time after, whenever her hand rose to lift her cup, some part of me went still and cold and ready, and I think some part of her did too, for she would catch my eye across the garden before she drank every morning, a small look that meant it's only chamomile, guardsman, we're all right, and I would give her back the smallest tilt of my chin that meant I know my lady, drink. I have you, and she would drink, and we would both let the breath go. The king changed after that morning. It took a poisoning in his own garden to break the gray glass grief had made of him, and when it broke, he came back to his children, held them closer, trusted his son Rowan with more of the true weight of the crown, and never again let gratitude to a clever hand stand in for the harder work of watching his own house with his own eyes. He sent for me once alone, and asked why I had not come to him that first night with what I suspected. And I told him the truth, that a beloved liar cannot be beaten by an accusation, only by her own hand caught reaching, that if I had spoken too soon he would have wanted to disbelieve me, because believing me would have broken his second grief on top of his first, and that a guardsman's whole trade is knowing when to move and, harder, when to stand still and wait for the true moment. The king was quiet a long while. Then he said, "You waited 11 days to save my daughter when speaking would have saved yourself. Most men have it backward." And he took from his own hand a ring, Isolde's ring, that he had worn since her death, and pressed it into my glove and closed my fingers over it. Her mother would want the man who caught her fall to have it. I have no higher thing to give, and there is no higher thing. I wear it still on a cord beneath the tunic where it does not show. A guard's honors are not for showing. That is the whole of it. People still tell the story wrong. They tell it as the princess who collapsed of a broken heart in the garden, because the true story was kept quiet for the crown's sake, and the quiet grew a legend of its own, a sad, pretty legend about a delicate lady and her weak line. But there is no delicate lady in the true story and no weak line. There is a woman who woke from her own attempted murder and said, "Tell me what to do so she is caught," and acted her death for 13 mornings to save her father the grief of doubting, and a coward who became a witness, and a child who guards better than a guardsman, and a cup that would not lie. And there is me, the man who felt his shoulders tighten before his mind knew why and was already moving and caught her. That is the part they get right, at least the only part they know, the guard who caught her. But they think catching her was the falling in the garden. It was not. Catching her was the 11 days after, the standing still, the waiting, the cup painted in the dark. The king walked into the sun. Any man with quick hands can catch a body. It takes a guardsman to catch the truth, and to hold it in a white glove in the light, until the one man who needed to see it could not look away. She did not fall of her heart. She was caught. That is the real truth, and now you have it exactly as it happened, from the only man who was close enough to smell the lie and disciplined enough to say nothing until he could prove it, and glad, to the last day of my service and beyond it, that when the morning came and she went down without a stumble, I was already moving.